2 more minutes. 2 more minutes left on the quiz. One more minute. Okay. 45 more seconds. I have 7 responses. I should have 13, so I'm just waiting on 6 more quizzes. Ten more seconds to submit. I am waiting on 4 more. Okay, that is time. Go ahead and make sure you are submitting. Again, I have 9 responses. I have responses from Sierra, Mela, Kamaya, Giovanni, Alonzo, Mahmoud, Leah, Shakim, Kayla, Samaj. Thank you, Skyanne. I have yours. Alonzo and Dwayne, I need your guys' quizzes, please. Oh, sorry, Alonzo. Shaquasia, I did not get yours. Dwayne, I need yours. Okay, while we're waiting on those last quizzes, go ahead and make sure you are set up for a lecture on the Roaring 20s. So make sure you have a piece of paper. So make sure you have that loose leaf paper or a Google Doc ready for you to take notes on, and I will go and start sharing my screen and we will get started. Awesome job on that quiz. You guys should have those quiz results released back to you and put into PowerSchool, hopefully by the end of today. So you should get that back. And yes, there are quiz corrections. So if you are not satisfied with your response, don't worry, you can still do quiz corrections. Okay. So the title of today's lecture in terms of your notes should say the Roaring 20s. The dates are pretty obvious. It's the 1920s. And we're specifically looking at changes in society. The 1920s, as you've discussed with Ms. Somerville, were a huge piece of massive change in American culture. And so today we are going to go deeper than The Great Gatsby and look at what was going on in terms of the big scale stuff of what is happening in the United States in the 1920s. So once you have the name of the lecture written on a piece of paper and you're ready to take notes, please chat a 100. Thank you, Skyanne. Awesome, looks like a good chunk of us are there. Great, we'll go ahead and get started. So first we're gonna look and see about how values began to change. How values began to change. In the 1920s, a new jazz age emerged. And the youth of America decided it was time to rebel. Jazz became a symbol of this new young America. And specifically, the women of this jazz age were known as the flappers. F-L-A-P-P-E-R-S, the flappers. The flappers expressed their femininity in new ways. They wore shorter and looser dresses and cut their hair very short. They also had the opportunity to use traditionally male vices at the time. So male vices like smoking and drinking. Women were now able to do that with a lot more freedom under the flapper movement. Women also had a lot more freedom because, as we know, the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote, which gave them political independence. In the 1920s, divorce rates skyrocketed as women now felt they had the opportunity and the ability to leave negative marriages. We also start to see the increase of a different type of female liberation in terms of sexual freedom. And this was spearheaded by this woman named Margaret Sanger. I'll put her name in the chat so you guys can spell it. She will be coming up again when we talk about the women's liberation movement of the 1960s. Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger, spelled M-A-R-G-A-R-E-T, and her last name Sanger is spelled S-A-N-G-E-R. Margaret Sanger advocated for more birth control, and she provided more access to contraception like condoms and things like that. She also will become one of the founders of what we know today as Planned Parenthood. So not only are women dressing differently, not only are they behaving differently, they also have a lot more freedom in terms of their personal lives than they ever had before. Despite all of these awesome transitions that women had, a lot of things remained unchanged. Women continued to be expected to stay at home as a mother and as a wife. And because of this, new inventions like the vacuum or the dishwasher were specifically marketed towards women. Sorry. Why is this not? Sorry, guys, I'm having some issues with my tech in the building. There we go. Not only were women still expected to live and work within the home, they also had laws put in place that limited these new freedoms that they had, like the Comstock laws. I just put those into the chat. Comstock is spelled C-O-M-S-T-O-C-K. And the Comstock laws made it illegal to send or distribute contraceptive materials. Contraceptive is spelled C-O-N-T-R-A-C-E-P-T-I-V-E. So again, it was illegal to send or distribute contraceptive materials, which means it was illegal to distribute or send out things that prevent pregnancy and even information about how to prevent pregnancy. So this was not just actual things like condoms and things like that. It was also illegal to talk about it. It was illegal to send information on how to use these things correctly. And in response to these new changes in values, we also start to see the rise of something called fundamentalism. So this is the name of a new slide, the rise of fundamentalism. Fundamentalist preachers, so again, fundamentalism is a type of like religious belief. Fundamentalist preachers taught that the Bible is literally true. So what that means is that the Bible is not up for any types of interpretation. So whatever it says in the Bible is literal. It says God created the earth in 7 days. So that means they believe that he literally taught it in 7 days. As an example. The most famous preacher of this movement was named Billy Sunday. Billy Sunday. And he used the new invention of the radio So again, he used the new invention of the radio to give sermons on the evils of alcohol, dancing, and argued that the United States was declining in morality. because of this rise in fundamentalism, we start to see a clash between fundamentalists and science. So again, there's a clash between fundamentalists and science. And the most famous example of this is in the Scopes monkey trial. Scopes is S-C-O-P-E-S. The Scopes monkey trial was in 1925. And it's centered on the ability to teach evolution in schools. So again, it's about the ability to teach evolution in schools. And eventually laws were put in place that where evolution could not be taught in schools. We also start to see a new rise in racial tension. After World War I, we have the Great Migration. And the Great Migration, again, is the transition of African Americans from the rural South to northern cities. So again, in the Great Migration, we see a lot of African Americans moving to northern cities from the South. And they did it for two main reasons. One, there were more job opportunities in the South. There are more job opportunities in the North. Thank you, Mayla, for the facial expression. Made me catch it. And two, they wanted to escape the increasing violence of the South. So more job opportunities in the North and also more violence in the South. However, as we know, racial violence does not stop in the South. In 1919, the United States went through a period called the Red Summer. 1919, the Red Summer. Mob violence between white and Black Americans erupted in about 25 cities, all around the same time. So again, violence between white and Black Americans amongst like 25 cities. These cities were in both the North and the South, but the worst was Chicago. Looking to the South, in the 1920s, we see kind of the height of lynchings in the Jim Crow era. To give some historical context, After Grant was president, we saw a decrease in activity in the KKK. They never fully went away, but the Ku Klux Klan was much quieter after the Grant presidency. But in 1915, the Ku Klux Klan went through a resurgence. The KKK went through this resurgence partially because of a film called The Birth of a Nation. In The Birth of a Nation, the Ku Klux Klan are portrayed as heroes, saving the South. From these new freed people. Another shift in the Ku Klux Klan at this time is they don't just target African Americans. This incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan also goes after people who are Catholic, people who are Jewish, or are just immigrants. In this time, we also see the Ku Klux Klan spread from the South and take up residents across the country. There is now a KKK division in California. There's one in New York. There is one basically in any state you could step in. And by 1926, the KKK had a membership of 4 million people. However, African Americans do not just sit back. And we also start to see one of the first incarnations of a true civil rights movement after the Civil War. A prominent member of this new civil rights movement for African Americans is Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey, in 1916, developed the first ideas of what we call Black nationalism. Garvey advocated for individual and racial pride for African Americans. Garvey argued for Black separatism. Separatism is spelled S-E-P-A-R-A-T-I-S-M. So Garvey argued for Black separatism and economic self-sufficiency. He also advocated for a Back to Africa movement. So again, Garvey also argues for a Back to Africa movement. And Garvey's ideas will become the foundation of the Black nationalism movement in the 1960s. Now we're going to transition and look more at the culture of the 1920s. In the 1920s, we see a huge development of new technology. And one of the most important pieces of technology to come out of the 1920s is the radio. Between 1920 and 1930, 10 million radios were in the United States. And these broadcasts went from news to sports, quiz shows, comedy. Basically, there was a radio show for anything that you might find interesting. We also see the development of Hollywood. So again, we see the creation of Hollywood. And movie stars for the first time have a national presence. Alongside Hollywood stars, we also see athletes start to get a lot of recognition. Probably the most famous of this era was Babe Ruth. Who is one of the best baseball players of all time. So this is the first time where we really see this idea of celebrities becoming like notable. However, not everybody was enraptured with the 1920s. And some people had a lot of issues with it. One of the most notable groups of writers is what we know as the Lost Generation. Again, the Lost Generation. These were writers who were disillusioned with the 1920s. Some examples are Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald. Authors like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway expressed their disillusionment with the 1920s focused on the issues of materialism. Another group of writers or artists who had issues with the 1920s fell under the Harlem Renaissance. Again, the Harlem Renaissance. And I just misspelled Renaissance in the chat. But the Harlem Renaissance is the artistic movement that celebrated African-American heritage, and they commented on African-American heritage with a wide array of emotions, going from joy to sadness. I'm going to speed along since we only have a few more minutes. Another type of cultural pushback we see in this time is prohibition. In 1919, the 18th Amendment, the 18th Amendment was passed. And the 18th Amendment prohibits the manufacturing and the selling of alcohol. So again, the 18th Amendment prohibits the selling and creation of alcohol. And the goal is to create a sober nation. And it doesn't do that. In the cities, we start to see the creation of things called speakeasies. Put that in the chat. Sorry, I accidentally went back. So again, in the cities, we start to see the creation of speakeasies, spelled S-P-A-S-P-E-A-K-E-A. Try that again. Speakeasies spelled S-P-E-A-K-E-A-S-I-E-S. And speakeasies are basically underground bars where people could still go to drink. And the police were paid to look the other way. So even though these speakeasies were well known, the police didn't really do anything about it. And in 1933, the United States government realized that prohibition's kind of dumb and it's really hard to enforce. So in 1933, the 21st Amendment was passed and it repeals the 18th. And the 18th Amendment is the only amendment to ever be reversed. Two more slides. So 2 more slides. One reaction to World War I was an increase of nativism in the United States. So again, an increase of nativism in the United States. And in 1919, we see the start of the first Red Scare. And the Red Scare is basically an exaggerated fear of communism. The Attorney General at the time, A. Mitchell Palmer. So again, the Attorney General at the time, A. Mitchell Palmer, pushed for mass arrests of anybody that even kind of looked like a communist with little to no evidence. The most famous example is the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, which is spelled on the screen if you look at the image. The Sacco and Vanzetti trial of 1921. These two men had been arrested for robbery and murder with zero evidence. And they were specifically targeted because they were poor immigrants. And the two men were executed in 1927. We also start to see a new set of laws passed that prohibited immigration into the United States. The Immigration Act of 1921 and the National Origins Act of 1924 targeted groups of people that were seen as undesirable citizens. So again, these acts targeted people who were considered undesirable citizens. Last slide, we'll do this very quickly. The 1920s are also notable for their conservative governments. In the 1920s, all three presidents that were president during the 1920s were Republican. And President Warren G. Harding won the election of 1920 with a promise to return to normalcy. Harding passed very conservative economic legislation that reduced any type of government control over businesses. And these policies were continued by Calvin Coolidge, his successor. Coolidge is spelled Coolidge. So these economic policies were continued by Calvin Coolidge and the president after him, Herbert Hoover. And in these economic policies, we see very little control of businesses and any type of regulation, which leads to a booming 1920s and a thing called the Great Depression, which will be our next lecture, not next week, but the week after. So after February break. Okay, that is it. Obviously, we do not have time for the exit ticket. If you choose to do the exit ticket, I will count it as extra credit, so that opportunity is there. Feel free to do that for extra credit. I will check that at tomorrow probably. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns. Please hit the turn in button on today's student assignment so that way I can make sure we have that